What's up, YouTubers and plant lovers? It's Justin, and today I wanted to repot one of my mysterious orchids. Now I say mysterious, but only because I'm not entirely sure what type of orchid it is. I believe it's an oncidium, based on the flowers, but if you do know, feel free to correct me in the comments. But like I said, I do have some of the flower spikes from where I just recently cut them off, and they do have some pretty red and yellow kind of flowers that look like the oncidiums, and the pseudobulbs kind of remind me of that, and the leaves as well. But like I said, I'm not 100% sure, so I'm not going to say with 100% absolute certainty that it is an oncidium. As you can tell, it is in a rather small plastic pot, and then some of the media on top looks like it is dying a little bit. So I got this from a friend who said that they weren't entirely able to take care of the plant and didn't know exactly how to care for it. So they gave it to me in hopes that I would actually rescue it and help it and not actually kind of hurt it even more. But alas, I'm going to go ahead and repot it because he's gotten rather top heavy, and if you squeeze the container that he's in, it barely gives at all, so I can tell it's really tight. Some of the roots are coming out the bottom of the pot, but I want to go ahead and give him a new home in hopes that it will actually help him out and give him a little bit more room to kind of spread out there. Now, when rehoming an orchid, you do have several different options. You can go the plastic route, which will help it hold on to more water, so it will actually keep them a little bit more healthy. But if you find you're like me and you tend to give a lot of water and check on your orchids a little bit obsessively, terracotta is probably the better option for you, just because terracotta, as we know, is rather porous and will actually help evaporate some of that water and wick it away from the root mass, which in turn will kind of help them out so that they won't succumb to root rot. Now, I'm not saying that it is a cure-all for that, but it does breathe, and it does allow the roots to kind of wick away some minerals and some water and any other kind of salts that may kind of build up around the root mass. But terracotta does have its faults with it too, and that being that it doesn't hold on to water as well. So you may have to check a little bit more with the watering if you do the terracotta option, but I find it is a little bit better for me and my home environment for the orchids. And they do get rather top heavy, so terracotta will actually kind of come in a little bit more helpful with that. They won't kind of tump over as easily, and it will kind of help weigh them down. But like I said, I wanted to go the terracotta route because a terracotta pot with a kind of green foliage like this really just looks spectacular. So the first thing I want to do is go ahead and make sure that the pot is fully cleaned and sanitized. And I also want to make sure it does have a drainage hole in the bottom. This one has a rather small drainage hole in the bottom, but I do have a little bit more room if I want to add a second or third or fourth or even fifth drainage hole into the bottom of this pot. So I added one in here, and I think it is enough to kind of help this orchid out. Like I said, it is porous, so it will help wick some of the water away, and that drainage hole will help it too. So always, always, always make sure that your orchid pots have drainage holes in the bottom of them. That is very important, and like I said, more than one would probably be better for your orchid. So what I did was I dug them around in my shed, and I found this old terracotta pot that wasn't too large. I believe that this is a 4-inch pot, and this is a 6-inch terracotta pot, so I'm not jumping up too crazy high in the pot diameter. But I had to clean it out with a scrub brush and hot soap and water, and rinse it out several times to make sure that it was clean and ready for its new plant. So always make sure that you wash or sanitize your pots out, especially if you just bought them from a store. You don't know what has settled down in there, what kind of pest or disease or any kind of person that may have come by and picked it up and touched all over it. So it'd be better just to kind of be err on the side of caution. So I've got my orchid bark potting mix from Miracle-Gro, and I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit in there, probably up to about a quarter, maybe even almost half of the pot. And I'll go ahead and start adding that in to get it ready for the new orchid. Now I've done about a quarter of the pot, but I know that this orchid has had a little bit of problems with its roots in the past. So very carefully, I'm going to grab some perlite and mix that down in there with the bark to kind of help the orchid and its roots out. Now you should always be doing this with a fan on, because that dust can settle down in your lungs. So very lightly, I'll just take my hand with my fingers and kind of mix it all in to make it a little bit more even. And just to kind of give you a little bit of a mixture where you see a lot of the orchid bark. So just to add a little bit more bark in there, because I don't want the orchid to set down too low in the pot. So probably about 2 more handfuls of bark mix to where it's just about under halfway, and I'll mix in another handful of perlite and then mix it all up again. So now moving on, you'll see I have my isopropyl alcohol that I use to sanitize my pruning shears that I will be cutting on the orchid with, and any of the other scissors that I have to help me get the plastic pot open to get the orchid out safely. And then over here to the side, I do have my scissor and pruning sharpening tool to make sure that they are rather sharp to get into this plastic pot, and that if I do have to cut on the orchid, that I'm not going to butcher him too badly. So very gently, I will take both of my hands and kind of squeeze around the root mass to make sure that I'm loosening it up some, but it's rather full, so I don't think I will be doing too much in the way of helping the orchid out. But I can tell that I am loosening up the root mass, and as always I have my little plastic container underneath me to catch any debris that may fall out. And then with my fingers, I'm going to gently kind of pull on the root mass or the roots that poke through the bottom to kind of loosen them up and get them ready to actually kind of pull up through. And then gently with my left hand, I'm pulling the plant out, and then with my right hand I am pulling the pot down. Now you can see all of this root right here. It all looks really healthy, but it does look a little dry. I watered him about 48 hours ago in preparation for this video, and most of this root mass feels fairly dry to me. So I will go ahead with my fingers and my fingernails and just gently work around the root mass and lightly just kind of try and separate some of this out. Now be very patient with this, because if you pull too hard and too fast, you'll rip a bunch of the roots out. Now some of that will be okay, because a lot of this will fall off. Some of this will be dead, just based on the sheer mass of all these roots here. Alright, now once you get the root mass about a quarter to about halfway kind of loosened up, ideally you want it to kind of fit perfectly down into the pot, and if I had that entire mass down in there, it would have been sticking up and wouldn't have fit down in the pot, nor had a whole bunch of room to kind of spread out over the next couple of months. So now that I've loosened up a majority of that, I will go ahead and prune back this root mass here. People often assume when you prune, you just prune above the soil, and that's all that matters. But ideally you do want to prune below the soil with the root mass also. I'm going to prune about a quarter to halfway on this root mass. You don't want to prune too much. You'll send the plant into shock, but you want it to be even consistently around. And while you're down here, you just want to look the roots over, kind of smell around, look for any discolored roots, or feel around for any mushy, slimy roots, or kind of even smell for any kind of rotted roots. Any of this would indicate that you do have root rot. If you see a bunch of discolored roots, typically black, or any kind of mushy or slimy roots, or anything that kind of smells, this would indicate that you may have root rot with your roots. Fortunately, I don't see any of that, but on top of the root mass here, I can tell that a lot of this orchid sphagnum moss and bark mix has kind of died away and left some of this black residue around the tops of the roots over here. And at first it gave me cause for concern, but as I'm able to pull all of this away, I can tell that it's mainly just kind of that moss and bark mix that is discolored rather than the roots, because I can see around here that the top of the roots still look rather healthy. And then I will go ahead and sit him down in here to make sure he fits rather comfortably. And he's a little bit taller than I'd like, so I'm going to trim another little bit off. And then with one hand I will kind of secure the orchid in place, and the other hand I will start adding in some bark mix, and then make a little bit of a mess while I'm at it here. Now, it is very important not to just dump the orchid bark down in there. You want to take your fingers and kind of work your way down and push this bark mix down a little bit if possible. And then with about a little bit of, maybe about an inch or two of bark mix, I'll mix in some perlite just to kind of make an even consistency around the roots there. And occasionally just kind of take your hands and just kind of work some of that extra bark mix and perlite down towards the center of the pot to make sure that this will all hold the orchid in place and upright in a comfortable position for the plant. Now, when supporting a pseudobulb, you'll want to hold it up with one hand and then kind of tuck in some of the bark mix with the other or your finger. Now, it can be a little tricky because you don't want to pull the plant off center. You want to make sure it's mixed in there and even on all sides. And now, before I add the rest of the bark mix in, I'm going to sprinkle in just a little bit of perlite around the tops and down here on the sides. And again, I'm just taking my fingers and trying to work some of this bark mix down towards the center of the root mass. That way it's all not just sitting on top of the roots, but kind of meshed in and worked in to the root mass as well. And just like with any repot, you want to kind of tamp down the bark mix lightly to make sure that your plant is secure in his new home and then has an even consistency throughout the pot. Now, I can tell the pseudobulbs towards the back are weighing down a little bit, so I'm going to place a little bit of extra bark mix underneath there to kind of further support them and prop them up. so that gravity doesn't necessarily win. Alright, now he looks pretty good. I'm trying to make sure that all this bark mix doesn't need to sink any further, but will kind of remain on top, ensuring that I have worked a decent majority towards the center of the root mass, ensuring that I kind of hold him in spot and keep him upright. So now this side is a younger pseudobulb right here, and I want to support him a little bit. So I'm going to tuck in a little bit more bark underneath him to keep him propped up better. Cut off any of this brown growth, the tips of these leaves here. Once they turn brown, they will not turn green again. So I will go ahead and cut that off. Now the last thing would be to go ahead and give him a little bit of water. I want to make sure that any of this leftover bark mix may kind of further sink down into the mass. Will not only help the roots and give him a little bit of a drink, but also mix in some of this bark mix to get it to kind of work its way down and into the roots better. And over time I may have to add in a little bit more, but as of now he looks pretty good. I do worry though, because one of these older pseudobulbs looks a little bit underwatered. Now the newer ones don't look as wrinkled, which tell me that he is holding on to water okay, but this back pseudobulb looks a little wrinkled. And I watered him about 48 hours ago, so I was hoping he would actually plump up some, but I don't see too much wrong with his leaves. The color looks okay, and I don't see anything that indicates there may be an infestation with this plant. I was worried with the browning of some of the leaf tips that it may have been a fungal issue, because brown discoloration on the leaf tips and margins indicate usually that there is a problem with too much water in the root mass or the media, or that there may be too much humidity in the environment when the temperatures are rather cool. And with it being winter time, I did worry that there may have been a problem with fungus and root rot, but I was able to look through the root mass rather thoroughly and it looked okay, but we'll just have to keep a lookout to make sure nothing else kind of props up or pops up in the future with this guy. Well guys, that's really all I wanted to say. I will do an update video on this orchid just to show you how things have kind of progressed with him, to make sure that the pseudobulb actually does plump back up. I hope I do not have to remove it or cut him out. He does look rather healthy, the roots look rather healthy, and he looks pretty comfortable in his new home. So hopefully I'll be able to get him to flower again. While you're at it, go ahead and leave me a comment and let me know if you've ever had any kind of success or failures with any of your orchids, or which one's your favorite. As you know, I love Vivanda orchids, but Cattleyas are great, Cymbidias have beautiful flowers, and this Oncidium, I believe, is called the Pacific Sunspot. So I don't know too much about this one, but when it does bloom again, I will post pictures of the flowers. But like I said, I'm pretty sure it's an Oncidium orchid. While you're at it, go ahead and hit the subscribe button or the bell next to it. That way you'll know anytime that I've uploaded a new video. If you have any friends that have an orchid or need to repot one, or may be interested in any of my videos, please feel free to share my videos. That always helps me out tremendously. Until next time guys, always plant prudently. Thank you, YouTube.